Well, hello everyone. Welcome to tonight's live stream. My name is Dave Meikle and I'm joined today with Graham Power from the Global Voice of Prayer. How are you, Graham?
Great, thank you. Lovely to be with you all the way from Cape Town, South Africa, and everything feels as if you're right next door to me.
Well, it's so good that you can be on tonight. We're really grateful for your time, Graham. Thanks for joining us and sharing with what's happening with Global Voice of Prayer. And speaking of Global Voice of Prayer, can you tell us a little bit about Global Voice of Prayer? Like, what is it that you guys do and who are you serving?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. So Global Voice of Prayer is an initiative that was started out of Global Day of Prayer. Global Day of Prayer started off with a stadium gathering in Cape Town, Newland Stadium, back in 2001. And God had, through an amazing vision, shown how we were to challenge the churches from all different denominations to come together for a day of repentance and prayer. And what started out then as one gathering, the next year, 9 gatherings across South Africa. Year 3, 27 nations in Southern Africa. Year 4, all 54 nations in Africa, plus the islands. 22 million people prayed together in 2004. And from there, he showed how it would roll out across the world. And by year 10, we had over 350 million people globally, including Australia and elsewhere, that were praying together on Pentecost. And from that point, it has become, or more recently, we have linked up with people such as Hope Movement, Ushers Go 2020, Unite 714, and various others, and the prayer initiatives around the world. And so Global Voice of Prayer is really a network linking up people in the prayer initiatives globally. And the intent is just to be able to share with the world what are the biggest challenges that we are facing. Right now, of course, COVID has been one of the key focus areas over the last while. And on Pentecost this year, 31st of May, we had an amazing unity of bodies across the world that prayed together. And I must say that hour-long program, of which Andrew and his wife played a key role, as she was the kind of anchor for us. And through that, a lot of friendships have developed. And so that is Global Voice of Prayer, relatively new, out of Global Day of Prayer, which rolled out for about 12 years across the world. And then we released it globally. And then God just showed us to, again, with a prompting from various ministries around the world, to really just pull it together again and to say, okay, how can we be focusing on the key challenges around the world?
Wow, that's incredible. Like, did you say, how many million people did you say you had together praying?
Yeah, Dave, I'm careful when I say that, this came out of a vision that God gave. So no man, no great committee could claim any credit. But what started off at 45,000 people, the first gathering, by the year 2010, around the world, every one of the 220 nations that we had listed on a global list participated, large and small. And the feedback, whether that be India, whether that be Fiji, whether that be anywhere around the world, the feedback we got from all of those coordinators, that in excess of 350 million people participated. And we had 3 things. We had a 10 days of prayer leading up to, we had the day of prayer on Pentecost, and then we had a 90 days of what we call compassionate action. And that is partly where we linked up with Andrew and the team and Pat and said, guys, post Pentecost, why don't we look at this 90 days of hope? And this is where this Hope Movement, linking up with what you guys are doing, has really been birthed. And it's been exciting to see.
Yeah, look, I really love the unity that is between the different ministries that are involved in this 90 Days of Hope, and we'll talk about that a little bit further into tonight. Can you tell us briefly why it's so important that we have such unity amongst ministries and churches around the world?
Now, allow me to share a little bit of what God had shown through the vision. Yeah. And then also how he'd shown me that there would be 3 waves that would cross over Africa and the globe. And then 2 Chronicles 7:14, he overlaid on top of those 3 waves. So to say I only committed my life in the year 1998, so that's 22 years ago. It was a radical shift. I'm a businessman. I'm in construction and real estate development. So we build highways and bridges and dams and things like that. I started the business at the age of 28. I'm 65 now. So we've been going for 43 years. And it has been 37 years. Where's my numbers? And it's been a dramatic shift that took place in my life, because I grew up relatively poor. 5 kids in the family. I'm number 4 out of 5. My father died when I was 18 years old. There was never going to be money to study. And so here I am in a world with lots of engineers and architects and town planners, and we have many engineers employed and quantity surveyors and so forth. And we build things like wind farms, where we put up these big concrete bases in the roads and bridges and things like that. And yet I'm not an engineer myself. So I started off as a trainee surveyor, went into quantity surveying, and then started my own business after 9.5 years working for one of the larger construction companies. Got a lot of opportunity with them, started my business, and it managed to grow, pretty rapidly in those first 5 or 8 years. And so here I was chasing success, more companies, more turnover, more material things, boats, farms, etc. And still there wasn't this inner peace. And then I got to a point where I went along, say there were a number of people in our industry, Christians, that kept on hammering me. Come on, we've got this gathering, we'd like to invite you along, etc. I must have said no for 5 years. And eventually, this particular occasion, they said there's going to be this big gathering, 250 people, all key leaders, architects, town planners, engineers, heading up of the biggest organizations, government and private. And there was going to be this gathering, and Michael Cassidy from Africa Enterprise, one of the great ministries in Africa, was the speaker. I went along that day, probably saying, here's a good networking opportunity. But that day I was challenged when Michael asked the question, if you die today, do you know for sure where you will go? And I must say, at that time, I was 42 years old. I was really at that phase and stage where I was asking a lot of questions. I'd been chasing success. And no matter how and when I got to that next goal, somehow there still wasn't this inner peace. And I want to say that gathering that morning played a key role. The second such gathering that I went to was 3 months later. I love sport, and one of our cricketing heroes, Peter Pollock, the father of Sean Pollock, was the speaker. And he is an amazing evangelist. And there were about 40 guys. And that morning, he told his life story and spoke about how he'd finished his cricketing career and how he used to have 6 or 8 pints of beer with the guys at the club every night before going back home, and been married only for a short while, and how his wife, he described, he said she got to a point where she was quite a nag bag. And he said, especially when he got home at 9, 10 o'clock at night after a few pints of beer. And anyway, he told the story about how he got home one night after having had a number of beers. And here his wife opened the door, welcomed him, brought him a hot plate of food at 9:30 at night, offered him a beer, said, what's going on with you? He said, no, well, I committed my life and I gave my life to the Lord. He said, well, why do you want to do something stupid like that? And he saw in the next few weeks and months what a tremendous shift that had made in her life. And at the end, he tells the story. And through that, he ended up going into the bottom of his garden one evening and committing his life. And I want to say to you that he then says, well, let me pray with you, close your eyes. And at the end, he says, now I'd like you to pray this prayer with me. Lord Jesus, come into my heart, forgive my sin, and take control of my life, etc., etc. And he said, keep your eyes shut. If you said that prayer for the first time, raise your hand. Well, needless to say, I raised my hand that day. And somebody had their eyes open because they contacted me the next day. But having said that parrot-style prayer, following Peter that day, changed my life. It turned it upside down. I went along and I got hold of books to read. one of the, or two of the books that really played a key role at that time. The one is Jesus CEO, and the other one is a book, Halftime, by an American businessman called Bob Buford. And I must say that that book, saying about how most of us, we start our working career at the age of, say, 20. We may plan to retire at 65 or thereabout. Somewhere in the middle, we have a point where we start asking some key questions. But in this first half of our life, from 20 till 43, 45, I was 42 at the time, he says we are chasing success. We're building a career. We're building a family. Most of us are getting married, your first home, but it's all about gathering. And he says, so none of this which we're gathering can we take with us one day. How about going into the change room at halftime and strategizing how you're going to play the second half? Because you're going to win the game in the second half, not in the first half. And all of these things we're chasing after, we can't take with us one day. So how about shifting from chasing success to chasing significance in the second half of our lives? And I want to say to you that that book played a key role in my understanding. Yes, I can remain in business. I don't have to, if I want to be a better Christian, exit business and now go to become a full-time pastor or a pulpit pastor, etc. My business is my ministry. And whether I am meeting with engineers or I'm meeting with clients, many times in this office, I pray with clients. Many of them say, I've never prayed in an office before. And anyway, I believe that every single one of us is born with a void. And until the time that I invited Christ into my life, I was chasing success. And amongst all of that chasing of more and more, nothing brought me inner peace. And it was that time when I made that commitment. And I went, after praying quietly and reading a lot, in my study at night at about 11 o'clock, I went on my knees and I committed my life, what I call 24/7. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, me, my family, and my business. And it was a radical shift. To say that at that time in the construction industry, there is a lot of collusion. There's a lot of price fixing. You may have heard with the Soccer World Cup 2010 that there was a few months later, during 2011, it was revealed in South Africa that 15 of the largest contracting companies had been manipulating and coordinating the tenders. A lot of work had to be done in a short time. And that day that there was that newspaper report, front page headlines, construction industry companies collude with all of these Soccer World Cup infrastructure. That day I sent a memo to all of my staff and I said, today I thank God because it was 11 years earlier that we had formed an ethics committee. We had exited any form of collusion, price fixing, and it was tough. It was one of the toughest decisions that I had to make, was to get hold of those other CEOs and MDs and say to them, sorry guys, but we're no longer willing to be part of this club. So I was part of the mafia, the ring, the circle that was busy manipulating. I committed my life. There was a lot of stuff I had to set right in my own life, such as paying tax, not putting personal costs through the business. And of course, this collusion thing was one of the most serious. And it turned my life upside down. And I'll maybe share with you a little bit later about I want to be careful that I don't do all the talking here, Dave. So
yeah, right. You're the guest.
I mentioned about the 3 waves. So whenever appropriate, I'll tell you about that vision that came over a period of 4 hours in the middle of the night.
Yeah, well, yeah. Why don't you share that now?
Okay. So I mentioned about the year 2000, waking up the morning at 4 o'clock with this vision about how we were to call this gathering of Christians at the stadium, how it would roll out across South Africa, and then kind of fade across the world. So now fast forward to October the 6th of 2006, and that was a Friday morning. I got to bed about midnight the previous evening. We'd had a 2-day gathering with about 250 Christian leaders, church, business, even some politicians, and we'd had a great 2-day workshop. And that next morning at 4 o'clock, I woke up for the second time in my life with, I can only describe this as an electricity through my body. I come from a fairly conservative Methodist background, etc. Was not a dedicated Christian, told you how I'd committed my life. But yeah, all of a sudden, I had this electricity through my body. I was sopping wet. And in that 4-hour period, from 3:30 that morning until 7:30, God showed me that there would be these 3 waves that would cross over Africa and the globe. First wave, a wave of prayer. Second wave, a wave of ethics, values, and clean living. What I can only describe as unashamedly ethical. And in that second wave, God showed that there would be a need for there to be a pledge form where people would commit to be ethical in all of what they're doing. Secondly, that we would be willing to be on a kind of an electronic database. So imagine if I was coming to Australia and I was looking to do business there, would I not, rather than going to the yellow pages, would I not rather look up what companies have committed themselves to be unashamedly ethical? And then I would effectively contact those people, do business with them, and hopefully there's a form of trust that is underlying all of the dealings we do. And then thirdly, that there was to be an ombudsperson, people that would monitor that if anybody were not adhering to this pledge which they'd committed to, that they can be removed or they can be penalized, etc. And so that was wave 2. And then there would be a third wave, what I can only describe as a positive tsunami. Now, when I think of tsunami, I think of death and destruction. I'm talking about the opposite. I could not see the detail, but God then overlaid 2 Chronicles 7:14 over those 3 waves. If my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, ethics, values, and clean living, then I'll hear from heaven, forgive their sin, and heal their land. That healing, that revival, that transformation that you and I pray for, like the world has never seen before. Now, I want to say to you, if it had not been for the accuracy with which God had rolled out Global Day of Prayer from 1 stadium, 9 stadiums, 27 nations, 54 nations, and at that stage it was already in about 170 nations annually going around the world, I would have had serious doubt. But because of that, call it history, of what had happened in the previous 6 years up till 2006, I was just so convinced. It's as if I had had that vision and dream this morning. So clear it is, burnt into my heart, into my body, etc. I have this little orange band on my arm, and it says 2 Chronicles 7:14, unashamedly ethical, as a reminder every day of that vision that God has got. So I'm of the view that what you and I are busy doing at the moment, when we talk about Hope Movement, we talk about these 90 days, we talk about what's rolling out across the world, we think of even the COVID that struck the world. 2 Chronicles 7:13, I'm going to try and remember it now, don't quite quote it as often. When I shut up the heavens so that there's no rain, or send a locust to devour the land, or a plague amongst my people. And then 2 Chronicles 7:14, which many of us know out of our hearts, if my people who are called by my name will humble themselves and pray, then I will heal them, forgive their sin, and heal their land. And so I have no doubt that this which we are going through with COVID globally at the moment is part of what God is allowing, as in 2 Chronicles 7:13. And the amount of prayer that's happening globally at the moment.
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of prayer happened back in 2010 with Global Day of Prayer, 350 million. I don't think that is a drop or a fraction of what's happening right now daily with lockdown, churches closed, people not being able to gather. We just think what we did together on Pentecost this year. One cannot even try to fathom how many millions and tens or hundreds of millions of people around the world participated. Hey, there's a desperation, there's a fear. We know we're not meant to fear, but I mean, we're human. There's this fear for our families, for our own lives, etc., and this uncertainty. So it's been an amazing time. I guess you and my great, grandparents went through a second or a first world war. We've lived in relatively peaceful times, and this thing has rocked our world. So exciting times. Great to take hands with Hope Movement. Great to see how these things are unfolding, and I'm gonna just continue to be expectant to see a revival. And I don't want to use the word revival because this positive tsunami is way more than any revival that the world has ever seen before.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm so inspired by your story as a business person myself, and really feeling certainly at the beginning of this whole lockdown period. So Hope Movement was really birthed out of us trying to come up with a way that during the lockdown period, we could still see people reach for the gospel and reached for good. And so it's been really inspiring to be able to connect with yourself and also Verna with Global Outreach Day, and to be able to really push this whole message of hope across the world. And so, yeah, I'm just really inspired just hearing your business background and your commitment to prayer and so forth as well. As someone who's also really inspired to sow into using my skills in the area of video production to be able to help people come to know God as well and to know the hope, because there is a lot of fear out there in the world today. Like we're seeing it in our country here in Australia. We're seeing a lot of the unrest that's coming through the United States and through Europe and South Africa, and it's the world really does need to be reached with hope. And so I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about the heart behind 90 Days of Hope.
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that with Global Day of Prayer, as we had this rollout across the world, with the IPC, the International Prayer Council, and various other initiatives, we together came along with the idea, let's do the 10 days of prayer leading up to Pentecost, then the day of prayer, and that was always broadcast via TBN, God TV, and many others across the world. And then there would be what we call the 90 days of compassionate action. And people would go along and they would go into the poorer areas. They could paint a creche or a school in the poorest of the areas that don't have the means to do that. They would go along and they would clean up some of the dirty streams and rivers. And so there were just many, many initiatives. One of them we did in South Africa very boldly for a number of years, is that people were encouraged to bring whatever they were not using at home, whether that be clothing, electronic equipment. People even brought their second or third or fourth cars that they had in a family, and they delivered it to the local churches. And they then put these in storehouses. I mean, it was amazing to see these truckloads that people were able to give away to the poorest of the poor. And so that was part of the 90 Days of Hope. And it just grew and grew annually. And people were giving not just things that were not of value, but things that they were not using. So we always said, it must not be your junk. It must be something of value that you believe could bless someone else. So those were some of the great initiatives, and many, many testimonies. Schools, they sent us aerial photographs of these thousands of bags with clothing that had been brought from, every home was given a bag, and they then could put all their spare clothing in, and they would bring it back. And the electronic stuff, which whether that be a radio or television or whatever, brought into a separate space. And so you had these photographs of one school challenging the other, and they would go home to their parents, the kids, and bring back whatever was not being used. So that, I hope, is some of the ideas that are even rolling out right now. And what I really liked when I saw Andrew's little clip, which you and others were on, giving their hope story, I was so touched by that. And we need to reach the youth. Those are the leaders of the future. They're the leaders of tomorrow, not in 10 years and 20 years time. And how do we impact the youth? And I just think that our biggest concern that we have, let me just say, in South Africa, where we have an unemployment at the moment of in excess of 30%. Before COVID, it was 29.7, the official figure. So you have some of these townships, some of these squatter areas. We have one near to Cape Town. It's called Khayelitsha. It has over 1 million people living there and approximately 70% unemployment. So you can imagine the crime, the youth. With lockdown for 3-4 months, the schools did not operate. What do those young people do? Are they going to be worried about masks and distancing? So you can imagine how many young girls would end up getting pregnant at the age of 14 or 15, or the amount of use of drugs and things like that. These things are rife when there are, when there is no good role models, work opportunities. And often we hear this analogy in Africa: don't feed us, teach us to fish. But one of the things that God showed me one day, he said, it's all fine to have a good fishing rod, a reel, the bait, the tackle, all of the stuff you need. But if there's a pond, but there's no fish in that pond, you can teach me as much as you like. I'm not going to be able to be fed. And so not only do we need to teach people, but we need to set the opportunity that there is work opportunities, and that anybody that is willing to work hard can go out there and make a difference. And being in the construction industry, we've built, I guess today, we've probably built 55,000 houses by now. And these are these small 40 square meter starter homes for government, for people that have never owned a home before, that have always lived in a shack. And so every year we're building 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 of these. And it's just amazing to be able to hand the keys to a lady of 90 years old. She's on a wheelchair or on crutches, never owned a home before. And just to see those tears and to see her grandkids. Potentially, her kids are no longer alive, either because of HIV/AIDS or whatever. And here she's got 3 or 4 or 5 kids that she's looking after. They all call her granny. But, is it really their own granny, or was it a neighbor's granny, etc.? Just as this mama takes care of these kids. South Africa has very much two worlds. We've got the haves and the have-nots. It's amazing when I drive from my home into the heart of Cape Town. I drive past the airport on the right, but on the left-hand side is Khayelitsha, with 1 million people, with all these shacks. And I think the question God asks you and I is, what are we going to do to make a difference? And I went off the point a little bit, but I think that this hope movement, these 90 days, should become 365 days, not 90 days. We know that, but it's an initiative just to get people pulling together, working together. And one of the greatest things for me was to see churches, different denominations, youth groups, cell groups that are working together that had never known each other before. And all of a sudden, they come to get to know each other through these various initiatives. They find that even though somebody could be from a traditional or a charismatic church, man, there's actually a damn nice person. And, these youth groups that are doing the music together, they become friends and they start doing initiatives together. That's what it's about.
Yeah. And look, I've only ever seen good things come out of unity, out of when different ministries, whether it's a local church or whether it's like a more of a parachurch ministry, like what Hope Movement is, when you join with other ministries in unity and you're there to get the same mission together. I've only ever seen God bless that. I've never seen it go, God's go, oh, hang on a second, I don't like that. No. I think it's God's heart is unity. And I think it's Super exciting. That's why we're so blessed to be a part of 90 Days of Hope this year as well. So thank you for that.
It's been a great experience, meeting up with Pat and Andrew and all of the team, all online. So I've never seen these guys in person, but it's become like best friends as we've just worked together. Every week there were 2 Zoom calls, and then we were on to, putting the program together. And Media Village, who put together that 1-hour program, would be in contact with your team, and they help to, play the anchor role and pull it all together. It's just been amazing to see what can be done thanks to new technology. And of course, that's what the youth are great at. Us older guys with less hair, we struggle sometimes to keep up with the pace of the shifting, but it's amazing to see. And God can use all of this in this time. Imagine lockdown without, cell phones or without technology. And thinking of how many million, I think they said 50 million people died in that pandemic, which was in the, over 100 years ago.
Early 1900s.
Yeah. So imagine if we did not have the connectivity that we have today to learn from one another, to be able to share information, it would have been a lot worse than it is today.
Yeah, look, there's been so many amazing initiatives that have been birthed out of this whole lockdown period. And so it's almost as if, you can almost imagine the devil sort of sitting in his cave, sort of, kicking himself. He's like, why did I allow that to happen? Because the church is now like on fire, and they're doing all these new initiatives. And one of the things I love about technology is what we're seeing is, believe it or not, like we have the technology now to place the gospel in front of every single person with a mobile phone. With Facebook ads and YouTube, we have now the ability to share the gospel far and wide. And so that's why I believe that this is such an exciting time for the church as we start embracing these technologies to see the gospel and to see hope moving throughout all the world.
Yeah, it's really a special time, and we must not waste a good crisis, a very big crisis. I say good. Many of us would say there's nothing good out of this crisis, but I think there are a number of silver linings to this massive cloud, this massive storm that we are facing. Now, you're probably aware that South Africa at the moment has just over 600,000 people that have had COVID in the last 5 months. We have reached our peak about 3 weeks ago, and as of tonight midnight, we shift down from level 3 lockdown to level 2. So for the first time, people may actually visit visit their families. Alcohol and tobacco sales were 0 in this period, total lockdown, and so forth. So it has been a serious lockdown for our country. Many people without work. The unemployment has spiked big time. So today is an exciting day for the country when, for the first time, people are able to, as of tomorrow, go and visit families, which they've not been allowed to do. So let's trust and pray that we're not going to see a second wave. We know across Europe, even in Australia, you guys, we hopefully are learning from what you've had, and hopefully the social distancing will remain a key focus for us. But needless to say, it's likely to increase a little bit as people are more active.
Yeah. I want to move now into some testimonies. Is there some testimonies that you could share for us of some just really powerful testimonies from either this current season of 90 Days of Hope or some really amazing things you've seen this year?
Yeah, it's really been special for me to see how, first of all, I've come to appreciate the value of prayer, and I will never underestimate the power of prayer. I remember that very first gathering we had at Newlands, 2001. The very next day, I had a call from one of the pastors in the township, and he said to me, I want to tell you, a young man arrived here with his armband on his arm this morning. He had a Bible in his hand, And he came to say to me, Pastor, I broke into your house 3 months ago. I stole your television, your this, that, and the next thing. I was at Newlands yesterday. I committed my life and I've come to repent. And if you want me to go to the police station with you, I'll gladly do so. Needless to say, the pastor said to him, no, you come on Sunday and you come and share your testimony in my church. So those are some of the things coming back from way back. Many stories of prostitutes that had been invited or asked by one of their friends to come along to one of these gatherings, and how their total lives were turned upside down. So it has been amazing to be able to see, one of the highlights for me was being in the Jakarta Stadium with 100,000 people, biggest Muslim nation in the world. And they broadcast to 67 other gatherings in the nation. That was in the year 2005. I was back there again in 2012 with another gathering, again 100,000 in the stadium. And just to have seen how people, when they pray together, the kind of shifts that can happen. I need to say to you that in Cape Town, in the year 1999, 2000, in that 2-year span, we had 18 bombs explode in our city. Hard Rock Cafe, Friday night, at our waterfront, one of the most upmarket areas. 8 o'clock at night, a bomb explodes. People are maimed, killed, etc. And that was one of the key focus areas of our prayer in 2001. We had quite a lot of strikes. We had quite a lot of taxi violence. We had a lot of these bombings happening. From that day that we got together until today, not a single bomb has exploded in our city. And I say, I will never underestimate the power of prayer.
Yeah.
As a business guy, I often said, Lord, why don't you tell me to go and build, homes for the poor or orphanages or for HIV/AIDS or whatever. And yet your instruction was about prayer. And so it was so probably the thing furthest from my mind, from my heart, from my understanding. And yet this was God's instruction. And I could just follow what he had clearly given to do. And so there are so many testimonies. We've written 2 books, one called Not by Might Nor by Power, just about the vision that God gave and how it unfolded. And the second one called Transform Your Work Life, which was just about how I experienced the shift in my work life and challenge to others. Often I would hear people say, well, in business, there's a lot of gray area. Well, I want to say to you, somebody gave me a book called Ethics in the Workplace. And in the middle page, it says there's an ethics checklist. 3 questions. Is it legal? Yes or no? I think that's quite straightforward. Second one, is this a win-win relationship? In other words, this negotiation, this deal we're doing, is it a win-win? In other words, that there's fairness in that play. But question number 3 removes all gray areas out of any business decision that I make, or for that matter, any decision that I make. It says, how will it make me feel if this decision were made public in the media? And how will it make me feel if my wife and my kids, my family, knew about it? So people often say, well, in business, there's a lot of gray areas. If you can get away with it from paying tax, etc., then, well done kind of situation. And I say, if what I've done were to go public tomorrow, would it be an embarrassment for me or for you? We have had for many years a Swede at rugby, at Newlands Rugby. So people would say to me, okay, Graham, so how ethical is it of you to invite some engineers or people that work for the council or for government to come and watch the rugby games, the Australians at Newlands? And I said, well, anybody with a pair of binoculars can see who's in that suite. And if on Monday that became public, if it's an embarrassment for the person visiting or for me, then I should never have invited that person, or he should never have accepted. And so everything that I do or any action that I take, I try and put over that third question.
Yeah.
Is it going to embarrass me if my family knew about it and if it were made public?
Mm. One of the things that you just said as well that that was really powerful was you mentioned that that God asks you not to go and build orphanages or anything like that, but to pray. And I think that is something that we often do forget. That prayer is a ministry. Prayer is a very important part of everything. In fact, it's probably more important than anything that you could like actually do, so to speak. So whether it's building something or going somewhere, starting a ministry, without prayer, it just doesn't happen. And so, yeah, I think that's a really great reminder for us to prioritize prayer and to see that as more important than anything that we do.
Dave, I think I see it like a bird has got two wings. On the one hand, we can pray, but on the other hand, there needs to be this action, this compassionate action, in order for
Yeah.
this bird to propel forward. Else it will go around and around in circles. So, yes, I believe we mustn't say, well, intercessors are these folks, normally introverts, quiet people. They're not out there in the front line. They're quietly spending hours a day praying for various things, for government, for you and I, etc. It's every one of our responsibilities to spend quiet time. And I believe, as per those three waves in 2 Chronicles 7:40, it applies not only about, praying and I'll heal the land, praying, me personally, and I will put that hedge of protection around you, your family, your workplace, etc. And so it will ripple out from there. So I believe every one of us needs to set aside half an hour a day, an hour a day. I can tell you that this morning I got in here, I got a message. We're into doing certain mining operations, and we've just had a serious breakdown. The manager, our general manager of that operation, sends me a note to say, I've just learned yesterday that my wife's has got COVID. And here's your manager that's running this operation with these big yellow machines, etc. What did we do? We got on the call. We did a conference call. We phoned and we prayed with him. I have no doubt that in 3 and 4 days' time, there's going to be a tremendous testimony coming out of that. A, the machines that were breaking down. B, his wife. This is an enemy attack on him and in his family right now. What are we going to do? We've got to pray. And we've got to, I've got to just have absolute faith that I don't allow fear to take control. And just to say, Lord, I just bring this before you now. Please put that hedge of protection around him, around his family, around that mine, so that we are able to operate and operate well.
Yeah, and it's such a good encouragement for those of us who are watching at home, who are maybe at the moment. I know certain parts of the world are more open. Where I live at the moment, we are open, but there are many people still in lockdown, feeling like they can't do anything. And I think one of the encouragements from today's conversation is that if you are in lockdown, you're not actually barred from praying. So spend this time praying, spend this time seeking God, and praying into the areas that God puts on your heart, and because they can be a part of the solution that we're seeing in the world to see hope go out.
Yeah, and Dave, I think we're going to look back in 3 and 5 years' time and say to ourselves, and our kids, and I take my grandkids are between the age of 7 and 15, and to hear the amount of positive stories that come out, them saying, the little one at 7 saying, well, my daddy's always been watching the news on television, or he's always on his cell phone. And all of a sudden, daddy has had days and days and weeks to spend at home with them. And we've played games, and we've done this and we've done that. And it's going to be a time that kids are going to look back in 10 years' time and saying, that was one of the best times in my life, as crazy as it may sound. So there will be a number of positives coming out of this. And without a doubt, the amount of prayer, the amount of people that have been so at loss as to what to do, that have got back onto their knees, people that may have backslidden over the last 20, 30 years, people that are so hardened because they've created it all, they've done it themselves. One of my favorite scriptures is Deuteronomy 8 verse 17 and 18, and says, you may say to yourself, My power and the strength of my hands have produced this wealth for me. But remember the Lord your God, for it's He who gives you the ability to produce this wealth. And I'm reminded that I can walk out here now and I can be flattened by a bus. I can have a heart attack and die. I must never underestimate. Yes, I'm working 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. I'm putting in all this effort, and that's why I've got what I've got. No. If it were not for my health, if it were not for my talents, the talents that God has loaned to me, that can be taken away like that. And it's thanks to Him that I have what I have. And yes, I must go out there and make action of the talents that I've got. I can't just sit on the couch and expect it to happen. But I must never underestimate the power of God.
Yeah, that's so good. And thank you for sharing today, Graham. It's so exciting to have you on. I just wanted to briefly talk about the Global Day of Hope coming up on the 29th of August. Certainly from our perspective, from the Hope Movement perspective, we've got a few things planned. Is there anything that you can share from Global Day of Global Voice of Prayer of what you guys are doing for the Global Day on the 29th of August?
Yeah, so the 29th of August, Go 2020 has been working on this 2020 that was way before anybody knew of COVID. And so there was a lot of effort. And of course, their wind was knocked out of their sails when all of a sudden there was COVID. And in fact, God used that to bring about the most dynamic Pentecost 1-hour program, and with prayers across the world like would not have been had there not been COVID. So when it comes to the idea of the 90 days, we are working alongside of you guys, and we've encouraged people to put their hope story, their 60 seconds on the system. And I did mine about a month ago or so. And it's difficult sometimes to put your story together in 60 seconds, but it's exciting to just try and bring out those highlights. So we're working alongside of you guys. I want to encourage people to not be shy. You can do it in your own house. You can do it in your own room. You can do it on your own cell phone. You don't need to have anybody there. It's short. It doesn't have to be highly professional. Share your story. Your story of hurt, of healing, etc. is going to touch somebody else. It's going to touch somebody. And God will use it in a mighty way. So we continue to stand alongside of you guys. We have weekly and 2 weekly meetings with Go 2020 as we and with Hope Movement as we roll out these various initiatives on Global Voice of Prayer, www.globalvoiceofprayer.com. A lot of initiatives, a lot of ideas as to how we can work together in order to make these 90 days of value, and of course post the 90 days that we can continue working together out there. And as you said, Psalm 133, where there's unity, God will command a blessing. I appreciate the unity with you guys. I know these are friendships that are going to last for many, many years to come.
Yeah. Yeah, and so one of the other things that we're planning to do as well is we are going to put together a live stream that will hopefully go for a few hours. We've collected about 250 hope stories that have been sent through to us. So I'm going to put those end to end. We're going to do a big, long hope story chain of just, it's just going to go out through the various channels. And we're hoping to also have some messages of hope interwoven throughout that as well from various pastors and leaders around the world as well. So that's one of the things that we're doing from the Hope Movement side. And that will be live on our Facebook page. And it's also going to be on the Go 2020 website as well. And I've just put up a link there below that will show where that will be held on the Global Outreach Day website. So we're putting that together at the moment. We've got a lot of work to do to get that through, but that'll be an exciting thing as well. And I believe that that it will be shared out through various networks as well. So keep an eye out for the live stream. I think it's going to be something that, I don't believe everyone's just going to sit there and watch, 8 hours of this thing, but it's something that you can share with your friends and your family, and they might stumble onto it for 5 minutes or something like that. get just an infusion of hope. Yeah, hopefully it really encourages people around the world. So that's something that we're doing from the Hope Movement side, and that we're very excited about.
If David's, you have another 2 or 3 minutes, I would love to pray for you and the viewers out there. So let's pray. Father, what a special joy it is to link up across the globe. I thank you, Father, for Pat Steele. We pray your blessing over him as he's not well today, that even overnight, Lord, that you will bless him and that you will heal him. We thank you for Andrew. We thank you for Dave. We thank you for the technology. And Lord, I want to bring before you the nation of Australia. They are not only great sportsmen, they're not only great businessmen, they are people that are making a difference in the world. And I thank you, Lord, that they've made a difference in my life and in every single person that is listening and participating in this broadcast. Lord, I pray that you will bring about a divine healing of the COVID pandemic, which has been across the world. Lord, I pray for Australia. I pray that you will bring about a healing of the economy after the impact of COVID, as I also do pray and ask that our friends that are listening now would also pray for South Africa as we are going through still a very rough patch. And so, Lord, I thank you. I thank you for dynamic leaders around the world. And I thank you for the 90 days which come to an end on the 29th of August, Lord, that it will be a special time and that we will see and hear many, many testimonies from people around the world. I pray your blessing now on each one. In Jesus' mighty name. Amen.
Amen. Wow. Thank you so much, Graham. Thanks for praying for us. Thanks for coming on here today. We're really excited to see what happens next, and certainly excited to see the relationship to continue to develop as well. So thank you for joining us today. We'll let you go now and get into the rest of your day, but thank you for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's watching at home. We hope that you will join us again for the next live stream when we go live and interview somebody else. So thanks for joining us today, guys. And we will see you really soon. Thanks, guys.